Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Florida Wildlife Advocates. This is episode number 7, and this month, January, we're focusing on clean water, the right to clean water, and everything having to do with that. We started out, if you remember back, with Stell Bailey, and she talked about how she had been fighting for the Indian River Lagoon and other areas affected by PFAS. Then we went to Brian Butte from Seminole County and how he fought to save the rural boundary there from a developer and the development called River Cross. And then the last one was Clay Henderson, the author of the Conservation Amendment that we refer to a lot in the Florida Constitution, also the creator of the FWC. And so now we're just so happy to have in our midst the Orange County Commissioner who really has taken the right to clean water to new heights, despite statewide preemption. I'm sure we'll get into. It's so great to have on our show today Commissioner Nicole Wilson.
Thank you so much, Chuck. It's really my honor to be here, even to kind of reflect on some of these things. Just feels like I'm so grateful for your community, and I mean you as such a leader, but also the people that have really been fighting this fight for as long as I can remember. And I am not a spring chicken. So, we just have to keep on continuing to push for the rights to all nature, right? But I think understanding that water was the most critical first piece. I'm going to pound that drum as often as I can.
Yeah, and we, you and I go way back to when you were in law school.
That's right, my first client.
And with the Environmental and Earth Law Clinic,
That's
right? And Professor Demings. And at that time, we were looking at different ways to bring the rights of nature to Florida, because there had never been a rights of nature law passed in Florida at that point. And that was leading up to 2020, I think. So that was early in the maybe 18, 19, somewhere around that area. And
that was 16, if you can believe it.
16, really?
Well, I think about when Pat Simons was still at DeBary, overseeing the jurisprudence, the Earth Law jurisprudence program.
Right.
And I always like to joke that she was a nun, and that I learned the right, when people are like, oh, that's not a thing, the right to nature. I'm like, I learned about this from a nun.
Yeah.
And she understood about indigenous peoples and about internationally the movement, and presented to a bunch of geeky attorneys that were looking at black letter law, and it absolutely changed my brain.
Yeah, well, it changed your brain for the better, for sure. And I know we've been running in parallel courses ever since. One of the first public comments that I remember you making in front of the Board of County Commissioners, and I know that a lot of this for people who are watching out there, they may think, oh, what's a public comment? What's a public comment? Well, here we have someone who made an eloquent public comment in defense of Split Oak Forest and keeping a toll road out of that conservation area. And, look where it's really taken you, I think. I mean, would you agree that public comment or the series of public comments that you made kind of was the stepping stones to the county commission?
It is what fueled me to try to do it. And I think you were probably sitting there. I know Valerie says that she remembers me looking up and saying, I'm going to have that seat. That this can't go on like this. I'm gonna do the best I can. I need to sit in that seat because the decisions that are being made are not representative of the interests of the people. And it was sitting through many and many of those hearings, not just at Orange County, but at state level hearings over various things at other county jurisdictions, and quite frankly, even our agencies like Expressway Authority, Turnpike Authority. Didn't make any difference to them what the people were saying, and what, quite frankly, was already a law. So yes, it was a huge platform, diving board, slide, whatever you want to call it, into being a public servant at this level. I don't know if I anticipated sort of the evolution of what we knew was a rights movement, bringing forward as many things as I believe it has. But yeah, that's where we started.
Let's take a flashback to that public comment. I'd like everyone to see, how the proper way to do it was. Now, just to set the stage, in 2018, December 2018, the Board of County Commissioners had made a rush decision to approve this road or approve a deal, a swap. And there was a lot of, I would say, lack of forthcoming
Let's call it shenanigans. Let's just call it shenanigans, because it was absolutely so hard to even get to the bottom. And as an attorney that was doing public records requests and trying to piece together the back and forth between two counties and a developer. And that's exactly what was happening. And so there was two counties, a developer, and then an expressway authority. And so it became very obvious to me that that there were, marching orders coming from the developer, the large, commercial entity, and that the public's best interest was absolutely losing out in the room to commercial interests. So it was illuminating.
All right, here's a blast from the past. It's Nicole Wilson.
Nicole Wilson, 1807 Glen Bay Court, Windermere, Florida. I am here in front of you today asking for the repeal of the December 17th approval of the Central Florida Expressway extension through Split Oak Forest. The December vote took place before you had all the information, so I want to thank you for taking the time today to review and rethink this decision before moving forward. You were informed that the Split Oak alignment would be a great deal because you were giving up conservation land. Orange County would be getting some new land for that conservation land that you were sacrificing. Giving up this land to get that land, however, is by definition a land exchange, which is a problem because according to Florida statutes that I have above you right here, it doesn't meet the threshold vote. So now CFX is saying that the deal was never really a land exchange, that it was a linear facility exception, but that doesn't work either. First, it's important to note that Florida Communities Trust Board increases scrutiny when any proposed change to a management plan is controversial or if there are objections from the community. That threshold is met. FCT gives examples of appropriate use of linear facilities, and those include power or communication lines, water or sewage pipelines, essentially things that don't change the integrity of the land. There is a specification for a provision for additional sidewalk or the expansion of an existing road for a linear facility. The use of the linear facility exception for large-scale destruction of conservation land for a toll road is not contemplated by this rule. But even if other requirements are satisfied, a linear facility is only approved if there is no reasonable alternative, if there is minimal impact, and if a thorough alternative analysis has been submitted to FCT. These are all things to keep in mind today. Finally, the project doesn't fulfill the land exchange rule requirement by vote.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you very much for your time.
It still makes me angry.
I know.
Because here we are, and it should be off the table. There are layers of, to me, sound legal arguments for why the Expressway Authority had no authority to enter or even enter into these agreements. But here we are. It's not off the table. I will say that there may eventually put me in jail for being out there when they roll the bulldozers in. I think we know that the viable, feasible alternatives that we had pointed out to them back then are now not as viable or feasible, and that's their fault. So,
yeah. Well, I remember after that meeting and the kind of disrespect that
was awful.
The current, or at that time, the current district one commissioner was showing everyone, that you either called me or texted me and said, yeah, I'm thinking about running for that seat. And I'm like, go for it. Definitely, we
I
need
think
a
this was the
change.
week I filed.
Was it?
Because if it's 2019 and I said, here, we were in 2020.
2020.
So we were in this fight now for 2 years,
Yeah.
or like over a
Yeah.
year for sure. And it was just continuing to march forward. There were some other really egregious decisions that the Board of County Commission had made in one of those I'm still struggling with out in the Lake Reems area, going into a wetland and destroying probably one of the last filtrations before water gets down to Reedy Creek and then Shingle Creek. And so that was it. I think I filed maybe either the next day or the day after that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you knew at the time. I think everyone was kind of, in a certain way, naive about what kind of race that was going to be.
Yeah.
Because that particular seat, the holder at the time and the predecessor who held that seat, who shall remain nameless, was they were so adamant on not releasing the power of that county commission seat.
Well, they're still very powerful. I mean, this last election cycle, I was up against somebody that if you combine the PAC dollars and individual contributions in his individual account, it was like upward of $1 million, which is insanity when you think about a local race. Yeah. And even the entity that we were mentioning that whose development interests played into Central Florida Expressway Authority's preferred alignment, supported some of these very large interested industries that have opposed my with everybody behind me yelling movements at Orange County to try to make good on the promise to the right to clean water movement. Put a target on my back. It will continue to put a target on my back. And ultimately, though, I work for the people. The people were interested in these things. So I prevailed, but it was, not easy against $1 million candidate.
Yeah. Well, let's just get a little flavor of the candidate that you were up against. This is was the current county commissioner for District 1, and this is like in the heat of the battle because your race went to a primary, which was, I think, in August. So this is sometime right before August of 2020.
Well, I think that
Betsy Vanderlei is an Orange County Commissioner and a Central Florida Expressway Authority board member. But she also owns a consulting company called the Continuum Collaborative. Even though state records with the Division of Corporations show that the mailing address for Vanderlei's business is in the West Orange County town of Oakland, up until this week, the physical location of her office was here in Baldwin Park. It was in the office of engineering firm DRMP, her former employer, which has contracts with the Expressway Authority and the county.
In my contract, when I worked with them, I was very proactive in stating that I would not provide any services for them in Orange Lake, Osceola, or Seminole County, or any municipalities or agencies therein.
Her opponent, environmental law attorney Nicole Wilson, isn't so sure.
At this point, I think the public trust is diminished, and I think that's a shame. As a voter, I would be very concerned about who was representing me and what their interest was.
Expressway records show that Vanderlei provides business development services to DRMP, but has filed forms indicating she has abstained from voting on those contracts. Still, Mayor Jerry Demings asked her to resign from the Expressway board.
Do you intend to do that, and why or why not?
Absolutely not.
During a county commission vote May 5th, Vanderlei did not file a voting conflict form, but voted yes on a contract to add nearly $100,000 to a DRMP contract.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
She called that an honest mistake.
And there have been mistakes, and I've been forthcoming with those and have remedied all of them.
It is very hard to believe that she didn't know that that was a conflict that needed to be really aired.
DRMP and Vanderlei have since ended their business relationship. On other matters, Vanderlei says she was unaware she owed Orange County unpaid business taxes because she has paid Orlando City taxes. She paid Monday for the past 5 years. But City of Orlando records also show that she hasn't paid another fee.
Unpaid $15 permit inspection fee.
I've never received a bill for it, so I was unaware of it until you just brought it up.
She promised to look into it. It's also worth noting that Vanderlay's other challenger is write-in candidate 20-year-old Hannah Burns. She's the stepdaughter of a former Orange County commissioner and long-term Vanderlay friend, Scott Boyd. Under county election rules, having a write-in moves the election to August, where far fewer voters are expected to turn out than they would in November, giving Wilson less time to raise money and wage a challenge.
It's important for people to know she's betting against the democratic process of people showing up to vote out here.
Vanderlay claims the move helps voters by moving the election up and away from the presidential race.
What she's done instead is she's continued to try and malign me and malign my character. That's not a campaign. That's just gossip.
In Orange County, Greg Fox, WESH 2 News.
So we're back, and in that melee of that was the August primary, and at that time you were on the ballot with, or that was the year that the Right to Clean Water made the ballot. But at the same time, there was a lot of contention over that particular charter amendment because when the Charter Review Commission voted in March, I think, of 2020 to put it on the ballot, the next day the legislature filed or passed, I think it was an amendment to a very popular...
It's a sentence. It is a sentence.
Yeah. So they added this sentence to a very popular water bill that was destined to pass.
Yeah.
And so...
Which is interesting, right? Because now that's become the pattern. Now those one sentence amendments, sneak them in. We know this is moving anyway. It's rolling. And then what's local government going to do about it? They did it again for you all in the CRC this year, right?
Yeah. It was the same guy too in Goglia.
Yeah.
I hope I'm mispronouncing his name.
Yes, you probably are, which is wonderful.
But so it was still on the ballot because nobody had sued to take it off the ballot at that point. This preemption had been tucked into this popular bill and it passed. So therefore, that went into effect. So there was a campaign going on for the right to clean water, and there's a campaign going on for Nicole Wilson for county commission simultaneously. It went to this August primary. Can you explain what that was about? Why a primary when you really only have two candidates?
So in Orange County, in the charter amendment, which lays out sort of the rules for the supervisor of elections and how elections go, or local elections go, there had never been a definition for what a qualified candidate would be that excluded a write-in candidate. So a qualified candidate for state elections, because they're partisan, is somebody who is qualified by petition or by fee. For the county, they never actually defined that a qualified candidate would be either by petition or by fee. And so because they're nonpartisan, that means that a write-in would be able to sneak in. And I know that seems extremely weird and complex, but it had just never happened in a situation like this where it literally forced, we were in COVID, right? I'm an unknown candidate. I'm a non-politician. I was trying so hard. It was the most grassroots effort ever. And I thought, okay, I've got till November. Maybe we can get enough momentum. And then boom, this person, the last day, at the last minute of the qualifying day in Orange County, there's a name. And this name is an unknown name to me. But lo and behold, once we searched the address, it was actually the address of the previous commissioner. And so this was absolutely a political maneuver in order to push me off the ballot from the right to clean water. And quite frankly, split out, because at that time we had also really pushed a lot of information out to the public about how their land, this is land purchased by your conservation, your dollars, your tax dollars, was being stripped for the purpose of a private development interest. And so, we had two of these very important charter amendments that were going to be put on that November ballot. I was going to be there, and there was, I believe, a thought that would help me get momentum. And so, the idea was push me to August. She won't have as much time to get this grassroots effort. And then also we'll remove her from the same ballot as these issues that she's been working on.
Yeah. And So it went to that, and the if the winner got 50% plus one,
Yes.
they would not go on, right? That
That's
was and so the thinking, I imagine, on your opponent's part was that she was going to get 50.1%
Or
or
something,
whatever.
right? If she was going to prevail,
Because she
she
had
was an
the name,
incumbent, she had the
right.
money. I had none of those things. It was once again COVID, so
Yeah.
even door knocking, even the cheapest thing you can do during a campaign was really
Yeah.
hard to get done then.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so we were trying to do contactless canvassing, and it was a really challenging
Yeah.
time. But I mean, you were part of this. It was also the most grassroots thing that you could ever do because we were just trying to kind of shout at people if we saw them outside going for a walk, and just trying to make sure we were talking to as many little groups on social media and yeah. So I ran in that August and thought, well, we'll see what happens. And I had not even put my stuff down from the last precinct when I got a phone call, picked it up, and it was at the time Jason Garcia was with the Orlando Sentinel. He's now gone on to publish his own statewide, what I believe is incredible investigative journalism articles. So continue to follow his great research. But he said, I was calling to see if I could get a comment from you. And I said, well, we're cautiously optimistic because that's what you say. And he said, well, what do you mean you won? And I said, well, it's not even, what? How? That can't be. And he said, oh, yeah, it's insurmountable at this point. They're calling it. And so it was just that decisive. Voters paid attention. I don't know, part of it I believe was that the things that I cared about were things they cared about, and there hadn't been anyone talking about them. And quite frankly, the people that were sitting in that position not only weren't talking about them, they were flagrantly ignoring them.
Yeah.
And so it was just a tipping point, I think, in the public eye. But what it gave me, Chuck, and it is something that has been such a pleasure as a public official, is I had a clear mandate. I can speak with a clear voice that I know exactly what I'm representing because I got to see these ballot measures for these important issues that aligned with what I believed we needed to be moving towards in, making sure we're protecting our water, making sure that every single human being has the ability to access clean, fresh water, that we are protecting all the ecosystems dependent on water, and that these things are not novel ideas. It's happening all over the world. But that we needed to make sure that the voters that understood it here had somebody in that seat trying to push things forward that lived up to that.
And that November, which you didn't go to November, right?
I did
You
not.
went
I was
right-
done. That was another thing that was so
It was like-
confusing because everyone was like, so what happens next? And I was like, I think I start work. I'll have to wait and see what happens. And I did. I was sworn in. I won in August. I was sworn in December. And so the time in between there, we, kind of picked up the contactless canvassing again and got back out there for the right to clean water and Split Oak in the efforts to try to make sure that we were getting the education piece. What does this mean? People, to this day, people will say, I don't have a right to clean water. Mm. Even with the disasters and tragic, tales from all kinds of criminal activity, but also just bad municipal activity. They don't realize that that's not a right. That is not a right. Now you might have a right as a tort to sue them once you have cancer, but wouldn't it be cool to be able to stop them before then?
Yeah, and even with that, and we talked to Stell about this, right? Because Stell got cancer, her brother got cancer, her father, her uncle, and her dog.
It's incredible how often I've heard these cluster stories.
Yeah, and that almost inevitably linked back to the PFAS that came off the runway of Patrick Air Force Base and into the groundwater that she drank and her whole family drank. But even then, it's difficult to hold anyone responsible because there are so many other environmental hazards, carcinogens. You walk into a not anymore, but before you used to go into a bar and people would be smoking cigarettes. Yeah. Well, there's carcinogens.
So causation is always an issue in environmental law. Yeah. Right? When you look for the ability to really use tort law, the way we understand tort law, right? I injured you, you can sue me. There's a cause, and that's an element that you have to have in order to prevail in tort law. And the difficult piece of environmental law, when we sort of see a harm, is you think, well, that should satisfy that element for a tort. But the causation, if there's other causes, then under the law, you can start to divvy it out in percentages. And it's very difficult to get the science that you need as a private plaintiff, right? Your family has cancer. You know what you're doing with your money? You're trying to pay medical bills. You're probably not getting samples of drinking water and sending them off to labs and then getting peer-reviewed research to bring back in as evidence. So people, don't have any redress. There isn't redress in those situations, not unless they have some kind of a class action, but those stories are few and far between, and quite frankly they're tragic in that it takes generations.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, correct me if I'm wrong, but in a lot of cases, the plaintiff just waits it out.
That's right.
And if the defendant waits it out, and the plaintiffs
That's right.
die of cancer.
Yeah.
And then that's it.
That's it. And to the point of needing the causation, you also need a remedy, right? That's the other element there, is you need a remedy. And so the other thing that they do is go bankrupt, because now they realize that this is, they were able to find some way to tuck in under another LLC or, whatever it is. And if there's no remedy by being able to bring them into court to at least find out what's going on, if they have they've dissolved, there's no resources, then you're stuck. You're stuck.
Yeah. One of the things that I find really amazing that you've done while you've been on the Orange County Commission is, even in the face of that preemption, you've moved forward to instill, because it's in our charter, the right to clean water is in the
Language
charter.
is there.
And it will stay there.
That's right.
Because a preemption is just a state law that could be repealed at any time.
That's exactly right.
So if it was repealed, then you have that sitting there. But that aside, you've used that right to clean water in the charter to bring about positive changes in policy.
It's really the underpinning even now. And so, and I think because we've changed the trajectory of the way that Orange County approaches environmental protection, environmental conservation, water resources, it's not an overnight process. It is an absolute evolution, not revolution. But that underpinning, now there's a lot of confidence throughout, not just myself and the ability to actually go up to the board and say, we have a mandate. We know this many voters voted in the right to clean water. What they were asking for in this charter amendment is to make sure that we are guarding those resources. And that can look like, the wetland mapping. That can look like the fertilizer ordinance. We got more passed in the last 4 years in environmental protections in a county jurisdiction. Then, I don't know if there's anything comparable, but I know that we are the gold standard at the very least for wetland protection on upland buffer. The 100 feet, I'm a little nervous about, them trying to swoop in and do something about that. You've seen the maneuvers from the state, and I say they, I mean the legislature, because quite frankly, that original preemption, I believe the legislature and really the special interests, right? The special interests that wanted to make sure that their bottom line wasn't going to be affected by the right to clean water charter amendment. If we're getting to clean water by adopting scientific data-driven policy, right, where we've got ordinances, code that goes into effect that essentially provides the same protection, they're going to try to get to those also. And so you've seen there's a last-minute budget filing to try to preempt our fertilizer ordinance. Because we had already adopted, we were okay, but many of the counties that had not adopted, that were using and utilizing our data to be able to adopt a fertilizer ordinance, they had to put it on pause. Now they didn't, because that was passed in a budget amendment. It was only good for 1 year, for when that budget was in effect. And the Sierra Club, our friends at the Sierra Club, did an incredible job of making sure that it didn't go back into effect. So now what we're hoping is that there is, multi-jurisdictional language so that we're all on the same page on this, because we share water, right? Water doesn't know it's running out of Seminole and into Orange and then out to Osceola. So the idea of having, being data driven and understanding exactly what the sources of the nutrient load is coming from, and then getting at it as many ways as possible. At the very least, we know we're actively working on surface water quality.
Yeah, and the way that's been incorporated into policy. You mentioned the wetlands policy. That's something. Is it the change in the wetlands ordinance? Is that in effect now, or is that?
It went in effect June 1st of 2024.
Okay, so it's in effect now,
So June 1st, 2024, which means that's a requirement of a 100-foot buffer. Now, what we know about wetlands is that they don't survive in isolation. I know you probably have so many people that listen to this that are scientists, and I'm not. So thank you, scientists, for everything you do and for helping us policy wonks. But it was really frustrating as a county commissioner. We have an environmental protection division, and we have scientists there that can identify wetland and different types of wetland ecosystems and their value. But we were having a hard time protecting them because they classified them in such a ridiculously archaic and arbitrary way. They did it by connectivity, size, and sometimes evaluations that were just out of date. So that was all, part of the update, was making sure that we weren't, eliminating small, valuable ecosystems just because they weren't, over a certain acreage. Because you could be, a very valuable and specialized ecosystem, a wetland, and not be classified under the old code for protection just because of the size, or because there was already something that clipped away at the development on the edge, and so it's not connecting. And that doesn't mean that we don't get benefit, and that there's not the possibility of continued benefit and restoration if we have enough of the wetland and upland buffer.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about the right to clean water as it sits in the Orange County Charter. Just for those who don't know what that means, how would you explain that to the average person?
Well, I start with saying you don't have a right to clean water.
Yeah.
And then, I try to make sure that I articulate that I do have a lot of confidence in our drinking water in Orange County. I think our utilities department does a good thing. But that we got involved in this because we saw the degradation, ongoing and constant degradation of our waterways. And to some extent, many people understand this as a recreational issue, but that's the same water you drink. And so if you can think about, if you grew up in Florida, if you visited Florida, sort of before we got to this tipping point on the nutrient loads, and you remember the springs, and you remember what some of these lagoons look like when they were, healthy ecosystems. And there's been a change, and that change, to the point that we were making about causation, everyone was saying, well, it wasn't us, it was them, and it was them, and it was them. And the ecosystem doesn't care. And as people who are advocating on behalf of nature and on behalf of sustainability for all wildlife, right? Not just the animals, but for the humans, we needed to do something pretty dramatic. And what that meant was to change that legal approach. And that the idea of approaching it from that we had to wait for a human being to be injured to have a legal redress and to have the ability to say, I think I'm going to need to get a judge to articulate what the rights are here, needed to be hinging on something besides an injured human. And so, early environmental law cases, they would put up flyers so kayakers could call in and testify about, had they gotten sick from red tide or from something, because we didn't have any other way of getting something into the halls of justice until we found a plaintiff. And why wouldn't a plaintiff be something that is life-sustaining for all of us? And that's water. So it makes very little sense that we've been able to, in our structure, give corporations personhood in the court of law, but not something that is literally life-sustaining in order to be able to protect it so that we continue to sustain life. So, the idea if I talk to a resident who may not really think it sounds we talked about woo-woo, that this sounds very tree-huggy,
right.
But the idea is, shouldn't there be some fail-safe for you that you don't have as many tools in the tool chest of how to protect yourself from potential pollution as we do from somebody who's driving, with their seatbelt off. We don't have as many legal protections. And so I think it's, I continue to say that permitting, which is what we're talking about, the wetland code is permitting. It's a broken system because it's still permission to do something. It's still permission to go do something, right? So if you go through that permitting department and you are asking to impact a certain number of what we know have been identified as wetlands, then that's not how we should approach this. We should approach it that you potentially are infringing on a right, that you're infringing on a right. And so, if you look at the threshold for what it takes to infringe on a right, it's got to be the highest thing. But until we are able to make sure that that's something that's part of our, there's got to be a cultural shift. I don't know, how we get there, except for doing what you do, what I do, and continuing to talk to people about it, and continuing to understand. In the meantime, how do we make sure we are capturing the spirit of that and capturing what people want to do, which is to really protect those, protect those bodies of water, protect their drinking water, protect the springs for future generations, protect the manatees, protect the fish, protect the little snails. It's all really important.
Yeah, and at least in the Orange County Charter, the four rights that were given water bodies in Orange County, because we didn't extend out anywhere but
everyone
Orange
benefits,
County.
right? Because the water doesn't know, so everyone benefits.
Flows. It was the right to exist, to flow, to maintain a healthy ecosystem, and be protected against pollution. So those were the kind of the four elements of it. I know, we tested this in court with Steve Myers filing the lawsuit to try and overcome
the city of Orlando.
The preemption, right? And hundreds of pages of briefs were filed, and they said, well, you don't have this right unless it's in state law or the Constitution. And we said, look, it is in the Constitution.
Yes.
And we go back to that conservation
Yes.
clause in the Constitution,
Yes.
that it should be the policy of the state of Florida to conserve
Yes.
and protect its natural
That's
resources.
right. It's articulated in
That's
so
our policy.
many places.
And yet they
It's
said,
in the
no,
first
it's
sentence
not.
of the same chapter that I'm talking about that we're updating for wetland code. It's the first sentence.
Yeah.
It's like a preamble.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yes, it does align with that. Once again,
It's in there, right? So here we are, we're fighting for something that everyone thinks they already have, right? That we have a right to, we've gotten to this point where you have really moved it farther than anyone I can think of in the United States as far as civil law. They've moved it into indigenous law. Right, and certain tribes have adopted it. But as far as civil law, by taking the concept and the spirit, you've been able to apply it there. So now you get elected, you're in office, and this is a little clip of you. I think this is in your office downtown.
oh gosh.
Hi, friends. Commissioner Nicole Wilson, Orange County, Florida, coming to you with another quick update, hot topic, whatever you want to call it. This week on November 15th, Orange County Commission discussed the Right to Clean Water Charter Amendment. If you recall, in 2020, voters in Orange County approved an overwhelming margin the right to clean water in order to keep their water bodies clean of pollution. As you know, water bodies all over Florida have become increasingly impaired, and the right to clean water presented a new opportunity to provide protection from pollution. The Florida State Legislature promptly preempted Orange County, and very specifically Orange County. So right now, what we're trying to do is figure out ways that we can update our code and not run afoul of that state preemption and still protect the water bodies in the Orange County area from pollution. There'll be more coming up December 13th. I'll get more information out.
It's just,
It's so great to see you sitting in that office, right?
yeah.
And,
Looks a little different now.
It's amazing the amazing power of democracy,
Yes.
right, is that these are things that are not predetermined.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. Like you said the first time around, Jason Garcia called you and said, you've won. It's like, what?
I wanted to rattle some cages. I wanted to make sure that we were speaking to the powers that be about the importance of these issues. I wanted them to hear from, not just me, but our entire movement that we are at that point. This is it. You are gobbling up public lands and turning around and spitting in our drinking water all in one fell swoop. And the public supported a big change and continues to. So we will, it's a long game, Chuck.
Oh yeah. And one of the beauties of not only your election, but also the outcome of the Right to Clean
Yes.
Water Charter Amendment, it got over 79%
Amazing.
of the vote in Orange County, and that was 2020, a very contentious partisan election. And again in 2024,
Yeah.
it was a rematch, right, at the national
wild.
level.
I know.
And here you are running, suffering, personal challenges,
Oh, that's the
and having a contender who, let's just say it, your signs were disappearing, right?
It was, so if it's okay to I think, I've been able to now reflect on sort of the differences in these two races and above and beyond the personal stuff and the COVID and the things in 2020 versus 2024. I think the most difficult part of this last election cycle, my predecessor, who was the incumbent that I was able to win over in 2020, really doubled down in her belief that, we should be able to hand these decisions over to private business entities, and that Expressway Authority knows better, and that these are things that should be handled in civil court. And so there was just some really fundamental things that she doubled down on and didn't have. She didn't believe or know yet how strongly the public felt about these issues, about conservation, about making sure that our code does something in 2020 that reflects science of 2020, not from 1980, which is when it was updated the last time. And so the difference is in 2024, my opponent did. So he would just walk around behind me saying the same things I was saying, but then taking money from the polluters. And so it was a very different challenge as far as the messaging. And, anybody can say you can take a picture in front of a lake and you can say, I love this lake. My question, if you are talking to an elected official or somebody that's running, I would say, okay, so let me ask you this. Who are you taking donations from, and what have you done with your love? Go back to Janet Jackson. What have you done for me lately? And the proof should be there, or else they're just telling you what you want to hear. And that's what was really happening. So it was scary to hear that, because even on our Orlando Sentinel interview, I would say, yes, I believe in the rural boundary. And he was like, yep, I believe in the rural boundary. And then the second he would turn around to a Chamber of Commerce, he was like, no, I don't think it'd be good for Orange County. So there was just some, extreme swing on, an answer fitting whoever was asking.
Well, don't you think that's really become the standard now?
Yeah.
In campaigning and confirmation hearings. I mean,
Awful.
we're seeing confirmation hearings of a guy who sat in front of me, just like you are right now, at an event, and was just overflowing with anti-vax
I know.
rhetoric.
I was there.
And you were there, and he's like, who can we get to sue and sue and sue and sue? So these pharmaceutical companies making these vaccines, and then to watch him on C-SPAN, and he's no, I was never anti-vax. I mean,
It's
the
so
same
alarming.
thing with your
Exactly.
opponent.
It
He
is-
was like saying whatever people wanted to hear.
Whatever they wanted to hear. I got absolutely maligned by my opponent and his sort of his base out there because I went to a rally for trans kids. Our LGBTQ plus community in this state, clearly, like, it has been just a very difficult time. You talk about rights under fire. And so for me, having children in this age group and having children who in my life that I know are really struggling with the public perception and prejudice and bigotry, it was important for me as somebody who they looked up to as an official, put on a shirt that says something like, trans rights are human rights, and they are human rights. And you would have thought that was, and so I got this comment from him specifically that said, well, these are national political issues that I wouldn't step into. Well, no, actually, that is a very personal issue. If I have someone in my life that I love who's being discriminated against, I can't think of anything more, personal. Same thing with the right to choose, right? What I do with my contraception, that's a very personal choice. If the state wants to take it up as an issue, I think I should weigh in. So, no, those things, you can call them a national hot button issue and then act like it's nothing you're going to talk about. But behind the scenes, he actually sat on a board that was a fake abortion clinic that lured women in to give them a pregnancy test and then give them, basically some propaganda about the harmful effects of abortion. And this was what he was doing in his private life. And he said, well, that's private. And I said, no, it's actually very public. If you are their registered agent at the state, that's very public. But we were in this election cycle that there was so much going on that people didn't really, I don't know if it was ever resounding. For me, it wasn't about whether he was pro or con. It was about the fact that he didn't want to say that and that he was willing to hide that. And I'm like, who are you? You can disagree with me about some of these really fundamental, I would say controversial political issues, but just know that, like, I'm going to always be who I am. And if you can't get a read on me, it's because I'm actually confused. Because things that I feel strongly about, I'm never going to lie, and there's no point in it. So it was really tough for me. I don't know how to debate somebody who's not willing to tell the truth.
Yeah, and just like 2020, it was deja vu all over again. A third party jumped into the race.
Oh, this was the vax thing. This is crazy.
And pushed it into the primary again. So here you are once again in the primary against a hand-picked candidate.
Last minute, write-in
candidate that really, I don't know if this has ever happened in the United States, but so you have a write-in
This
candidate.
is such a great story.
You have a
It's the
write-in
Carl Hiaasen
candidate, and it goes to the election, and the initial count was what?
So through the night, so I will tell you, my first call I got was once again from the Orlando Sentinel, and they said, you're 1,400 up. We don't know if it's surmountable. I'm like, this one's weird. I'm not going to believe that because it just felt different to me. And I mean that based on a lot of things. One of them was the state elections law that bumped people off that were doing their mail-in ballots, that had expected their mail-in ballots to come, and they never showed up. I had heard from many people that week, is it too late? And I said, no, you can show up on election day, but I'm going to be out of town. And I'm like, well, then it's too late. Because they never requested their mail-in ballot on time, and you have to do that every single election now. Every single election, and many, many people didn't know. And then watching the polls that day, it was just there was something different. And so when the Orlando Sentinel told me that, I was like, you know what, until the precincts are all answered, I don't have a comment. And then I heard from somebody that was down at the canvassing board who said, you're, within 500. And then they said, oh, he's ahead 40. And then they said, oh, you're ahead 7. Oh, you're ahead 5. And it came down to, once they got, the 2 days of cures, right? You ask people to go in and try to cure their ballots, find out if there's, something that you can, and it's not, they're not casting a ballot at that point. There's just something maybe wrong with their mail-in ballot. They need to do the right thing to correct it. It was 2.
Two votes.
2.
And because it was not 50%, because the write-in guy
DeBary
got,
County.
what,
All
18
he
or
needed-
something?
All he needed was something like 6, and he got 26.
26. So
It was something like that. But all he needed, like mathematically, he only needed a handful in order to take that one, based on the number of people who voted in the primary. And this was a 16% voter turnout. This was it was atrocious, and this is another reason why I think if you've watched the Orange County Board of County Commission recently, how important it is to have a good supervisor of elections, because this was the year that Bill Cowles, who'd been a steady hand for years and years and years, retired, and he's allowed to retire. But then we had an appointee who drove it off the rails, and so people did not know that they needed to get their mail-in ballot requested by a certain date, and then we saw him down there during the canvassing arguing to make sure that some of these ballots that were clearly disregarded were going to be. I mean, it was a disaster. So I did not want to go to a manual recount. So I was quite frankly like, let's go on to November, because I always wanted to be in November. This was supposed to be in November. There's only 2 actual candidates. Let's go to November.
And when you did go to November, you're on the same ballot as 10 charter amendments.
I was very excited for that.
And you, I think you had made public comment and talked about the Charter Review Commission.
Yes.
It had proposed some, and then the county commission put a couple on there. So let's take a little look at that history.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank you for all the work you've done. I want to encourage you to continue to keep your mind open to vetting this topic that I think is of great concern to many people here today, but other topics that come forward in the coming months. I think sometimes when you're wrestling with these things that you often think that you're making a decision for the county, but really you're making a decision to go look at something closer and then potentially ask voters what they think about it. And so the idea of vetting it through that lens, I think, has to be the predominant lens. And when we have public outcry about something, it does give us a little bit of insight into the way voters are thinking. And I think every time we've asked them about protecting rural spaces and our wild spaces, they have been begging, not just asking, but begging to protect those wild spaces and rural spaces. I always found it interesting that when we had presentations from people that work in traffic engineering and that work on roadway design, that they called it roadway improvement. But there's a lot of people in the county that would say that their little sandy road was fine the way it was, and that by making it 6 lanes across and 65 miles per hour, you didn't improve anything but how people may be cut from Lake County down into Osceola County. And so we have to be really cognizant about when we talk about improvement and growth, who are we impacting? And our rural communities have not benefited from a lot of this growth, and we don't know what's going to eventually happen to some of these wild spaces because we're running out of them. So I just want us to really keep an open mind looking at solutions. Seminole County has something that's worked for them. And I say work smarter, not harder. Let's find out what that is. And that's going to take a commitment from you all to maybe take a side look and do that subcommittee and really investigate what that could look like for Orange County. Thank you again for your time.
So you moved to November with your opponent there in District 1, and then there are these. As you mentioned earlier, there was a preemption filed that said that the Charter Review Commission could not put this rural boundary on the amendment, and we on the Charter Review Commission asked the county commission to put it on the ballot, right? And then it went over to you on the Board of County Commission. There was some shenanigans there about when this had to be filed, and then the supervisor of election that was appointed by DeSantis went in front of the Orange County League of Women Voters and actually got booed.
Oh.
And I'm like,
And only
how
vote on
bad?
yours is pretty. That's like the nicest group of humans on the planet, right there.
I mean, how bad do you have to be to get booed
They're
by the
like,
League
they're
of
like the
Women
most, like,
Voters?
thoughtful and they like very academic.
But he had tried to keep it off the ballot, and he got booed. And then, like right after that, he changed his mind. He gave you all some extra time to vote on it. So the rural boundary gets on there. The Charter Review Commission put an 8 on there, and then there was an annexation
very
amendment that also went on there. How important do you think that rural boundary amendment is going to be in the years looking ahead?
So I want to say that I think that Orange County, and at the time, we were working through this, so I didn't have a lot of opportunity, I don't think, to speak publicly about what was happening at the staff level. But what they did by separating those two issues was critical, because we understood that there were likely going to be ongoing legal challenges to some of these annexation issues almost immediately. We also understood that when we were, potentially were, there could be some legislative activity, there could be some legal that if we had these in two separate and distinct charter amendments, that we were going to be able to somewhat address the same concern about that rural boundary and about what's happening outside of the urban service area. So this was a very exciting thing to bifurcate those, even though all of a sudden now our ballot is getting bigger and bigger. But the rural boundary issue it's something we talked about. Gosh, I think the first time we talked about it was the first year that Commissioner Bonilla was in office, and tried to bring it forward. Didn't really understand the process at that time for potentially how to navigate those things within staff. And then, once we sort of saw and I'm saying we, as in the advocates for the rural community, saw how much the population cared about this issue. And I mean that in the Split Oak issue, the right to clean water. Anytime we ever had any hearing about a development application in a rural settlement in Orange County, we were there till 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was something really important to people, and we thought, okay, let's go ahead and get this on the ballot, because we have the right to do it, even with the preemption, and not the voters weigh in.
Yeah, those two overwhelmingly passed.
Huge.
Right? They were in 75, 79%,
Huge.
something like that. So the public obviously wanted this, even though the legislature desperately wanted to keep it off the ballot. And, you might even say the governor's office wanted to keep it off the ballot by virtue of his connection with the then supervisor of election, which is all changed. Now, one of the charter amendments that did pass was one that would give commissioners a tool to look at what the actual cost of developing a forest or a pasture 20 miles from town. What's going to happen to the cost of repaving the roads, replacing the pipes, redoing wastewater treatment facilities, renovating schools in the future, 20, 30 years down the line. How do you see that one playing out in front of the county commission?
I think we have to be, and I'm so grateful to have the board that we have now, because I do think that this board understands the impact after some of the more recent studies that we've had of getting the right person in to implement a tool like this. So I think we have to be diligent until that tool is in place. I am over the moon excited about this charter amendment, because we know that growth doesn't pay for itself. We know that every day when you're out there stuck in traffic or you're hitting the potholes, because even if, one of those developers pitched in the first go around, they didn't come back 20 years later to help out. So looking at this is a true fiscal approach. And what kind of business model is this? That if we think growing out and sprawling out past that urban boundary is somehow good for the bottom line of Orange County, we should be able to prove it. We should be able to show that. And having a return on investment is what every taxpayer should ask for there.
When that one came up in front of the Charter Review Commission, right? And there was a lot of hemming and hawing about. I don't know. It's kind of a radical concept. And
No, it's not.
remember Riley? I used to say whatever she said. Normally they went with, and she said something to the effect of, "I don't know any business that makes any kind of decision without looking at the long-term
That's
consequences."
Exactly. I love to watch. Your Charter Review Commission, by the way, was must-see TV. So even if I couldn't be in chambers, because a lot of this was happening when my dad was sick, I went back and watched and then sometimes I go back just for the fun of it, because they were such interesting conversations. It's such a different process, but it is the most democratic in that you're not under the pressure of a pending election, but yet you are representing a district because you are a district representative's appointee. And you're hearing directly from the people impacted, directly from them. They come up, they say, "Can you do something about this?" And then you're like, "Can we do something about this?" And then things happen. And it's it's a really beautiful, I love the Charter Review Commission. I love the charter process. And, as part of our legislative priorities list this past go around, Chuck, one of the things that we put in there is to maintain charter government structure as is. We understand that the underlying preemptions have been a real struggle for local government to be able to take care of local issues. And my biggest fear is that they're going to come in and do something, which it would be pretty, it'd be challenged. And I'm not going to say this into being, but to undermine that process, that charter review process, because it's our mini constitution.
Yeah.
And it provides the structure, and it should provide residents with some comfort that your voice, to some extent, can be directly heard and then implemented.
Yeah, I mean, that was quite an experience.
It was great.
We're sitting here right before the legislative session really begins, right? And I hope you come back, and after
Yes, please.
it's all over, we will talk about how to deal with whatever laws get passed.
Yeah.
And, as you said, they might try to mess with that. They might try to mess with charter governments.
Yeah, it's wild that, we went from a position of, local governments during session just trying to make sure they were getting their fair share of state resources to now just trying to make sure that we can maintain home rule.
Yeah.
And that we're able to actually be able to take care of our people and the things our people voted for directly voted for. So it's going to be, and I would say that for anybody that's paying attention to this, or any time that you care about these issues, reach out to your state representatives. They don't think you're paying attention. And so one of the other asks that I made actually of our Orange County legislative, she's actually the person that goes up. She's a lobbyist, but she works on behalf of Orange County. So to put in our priorities, it was not just who was filing these bills, but who was actually writing these bills. Right? Because we understand that there are industry interests. And so if we, even as a Board of County Commissioners, understand that there may be business interests that then turn around and come to us because they want to do business with us, we should know, are you working against the things that we've passed because our voters asked us to? And if you have, you maybe want to not try to do business with us because we're not going to permit that. So that's the next approach we're taking.
Well, this is going to be an exciting time to be alive in the state of Florida for sure. I want to thank you so much, Nicole, for stopping by and talking with us. And we'll have to pick this up again after the hanky drops at the end of the session. And hopefully we're still intact as a charter government by that time. Let's hope.
And if not, like I said, I'm going to continue to try to come at this at different angles. So stay tuned, because I've got some stuff that will be on my priority list for the next few years that I think will be transformational.
All right. We'll talk about those when you come back.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks again, Commissioner Nicole Wilson. So glad to have you here. And that's it for episode 7 of Florida Wildlife Advocates.